Right, I'm moving around, no problem, just going to get left by the light. Doesn't matter. So, hello, Porto. It's a pleasure to be here. It's always thank you. It's always a pleasure to be speaking Portugal, speaking so close to home. And it's also really good because I don't have to get on the plane and go to another conference, so it's a huge pleasure. So today we're going to talk about this thing called SolidStart. Now, just a disclaimer, this talk, for those of you who are aware, this talk is on how I use the platform called SolidStart. So if you already watched one of my talks previously, I'm saying this because I see there are people in the audience that already watched one of my talks, very similar to the first part of it. So don't worry because there are going to be parts that you already know, but there are also going to be ones that are going to be new. So I promise you that. So let's start this thing. I remember when a couple of years ago I built my first application, and I'm going to get winded if I keep moving. As I was saying, I remember when I built my first application a couple of years ago, and back then all I needed was this thing called HTML to describe the page. And then I needed some stuff to that page, so I had CSS. Now let me tell you something which might not by keyboard, but I care about CSS. But yeah, HTML and CSS, that's what I needed to build a page that was being served to the clients. But now I needed some layer of interactivity. I needed a connection with the database. I needed to break data from somewhere, update my UI, and send this back to the client. So what I added was this thing that not everyone likes nowadays, which is PHP. And PHP was connecting with a single database. And this was a combo. This was a combo to build a server-side rendered application. Every time the browser was trigger a request, it would send it to the server. The PHP service would accept the request, get the data, do the changes in the database, server-side render the new page, and send it back to the browser. And this worked for many years and for many months, until we transitioned to the era of the SPAs, or single-page application, or React application, whatever. And a couple years after this was the experience of building my first React app. Now, React, it's a JavaScript library, framework, whatever you want. So, obviously, HTML, CSS was not enough. Now I needed JavaScript. Now, this is React, and this is JavaScript first and foremost. So people who trust JavaScript by itself, we always want to add some type safety into it, so I had to learn TypeScript as well, and this thing called Webpack for bundling purposes. So I started with 4 things that I had to learn. Now I'm going on 5 already. But this is React. And before we went all the way about the state managed, all the server component discussions that we are having nowadays, the problem with the biggest thing we discussed was state management. So speaking about state management, Redux for the client state and reactivity for the server state. And it seems like already a bunch of other stuff that we have to learn compared with what we had in the past. Probably, okay, hopefully we would have to listen and check anything new. Oh, wait, 4 more things to learn. Now, it was not enough that I was going to be bad at CSS. I was going to be bad in CSS and JS because there was this thing called style components. And apparently, just the client and the server state was not enough because Porto state was also a thing. Oh, then we did routing, React Router, animation to React Spring. So, looking back to what we had previously, which was just all these 4 things, now I have to learn all of these to build what was considered to be a good application nowadays. Imagine that you don't know anything and someone tells you, you need to learn all of these single things here just to build an app nowadays. It's a bit overwhelming, I can say that. And once I saw this tweet one day from Dominic, he's taking good on Twitter, he's one of the maintainers of this library called React Query. And you don't need to understand what's happening here, I just need you to feel a bit overwhelmed because what this tweet says. So let's recap. So that's a button. This button on click is going to do a Redux dispatch. This dispatch payload has 2 parameters. Now, there's no reason using it, just a saga. This saga will yield a call effect, which will forward this payload, which will then be used to set window location in ref with this payload. I don't know if you're aware, you don't need to be aware of what is happening easier. I just need to tell you something, which is anchor tags. That's what we did back then. That's what we did. We just added this thing, href, and that's what we needed every time we needed to change the page. We didn't need all of these transitions and all of these steps. And I would think about something. I would think about when did we start forgetting about the platform, start forgetting about the web, started trading out all the accessibility that came by default, all the security that came out by default, and we started adjusting and building these things by ourselves. Now, I miss the simpler times. I miss the simpler times when, if I needed to do an mutation, I needed a form. That's what I needed back then. There was no need for state management. Forms have been the staples for documentations on the web for many years. That's all I needed. There was no need for state management, for form state management. I submitted the form, did HTTP request, got the form payload, and then we use it to do whatever we needed. Another thing I really miss, anchor elements. Now, every time we need to change page, we need to call a bunch of functions that we're going to call another function, and we're back on the tweet that we just saw. And finally, I miss when the URL described what we're seeing on the page. Nowadays, it feels like we're playing a game, and every time I refresh the page, it's game over, because I'm not going to be on the place where I started a couple of minutes ago on the same URL. URL kind of feels like we're forgetting that they should describe what things we see on the page. And this is one of the issues that started happening very recently in the SPA world. And to that I ask you the question again, when did we start forgetting about the platform? Because somewhere along the way we traded, like I said, on security, accessibility, tested things that the platform already gave us. For what? Really? And this is kind of the journey that we're going to go into in this talk before getting into the SolidStart. So strap in, because we're about to get started and we still have 40 minutes, so this is going to be fun. So real quick, just to introduce myself. I'm Afonso. I'm working as a developer at UX. I'm an AGADA instructor and Optim ambassador. You can find me on X, Twitter, wherever you want to call it, or this thing, or LinkedIn. And at the end of that, you'll see posts. I'm also the author of the book State Management with React Query, which was released months ago, so fast. So, which goes a bit more about state management with React Query. It's funny because I'm telling you about state management, and I love the book about it. I get the hypocrisy, but I really like React Query, and I use it many times. So this book has all these phases and all the experiences I have using it pretty much since V1 when it came out. Now, enough with the mobile. Let's just jump into the history of the web and the history of what we've been doing in the past years, because we started with MPAs, multiple page applications. That would be at back then. So everything was server-side rendered, mostly that was in JavaScript on the browser, or that was what we were not using it for what we're using it now. But then we started having an issue with MPAs, and we were forced to, well, do what's called sprinkling some JavaScript into our page. So now our pages were adding JavaScript into it, and they were still MPAs. And this worked pretty well for a while, but then we started having issues, and we had to do another transition. Single-page applications, what we have, or what we are still using nowadays. Now the JavaScript controls the experience and controls everything that we are doing. And eventually we're going to go to a next transition, where frameworks and meta frameworks like SolidStart, SvelteKit, Remix are fitting in nowadays and are helping us learning and relearning the web. Now, for us to understand why we need transitions and why this thing happens, I just have this pretty simple HTML page. So just to recap what we have here, we just click here. This is the quicker way. So just to recap what we have here, we have an HTML page, title, and body. And in this body, we have pretty much a form that allows you to add nodes and list those nodes. We cannot remove anything. We can just add and see nodes. Now, starting from the beginning, and let's see a couple of gives. Here, this is an example of an FBA. What we're doing, we're adding nodes, is we're sending a request to the backend. The backend would get the request, get the payload, update the database, server-side render the new page, send it back to the browser, and then the browser will refresh to get the new data, and to get and display the new page. That was how I started doing web development a couple of years ago. And the server, how it would work, so we have Express server here, and this server pretty much has connection to a database. We can add nodes, and we are just setting up the server here, listening to stuff, and we catch all of the requests. And what we're doing first is, whenever it's a post request, then we're going to get up the body, the form data that comes there, update the database. Then we get the nodes from the database, and we generate the new HTML. And inside of this HTML that we are generating, we're pretty much adding the same page, but now for each node, we're adding it to there. And this means that once the browser gets the page, it's pretty much the experience that we have. Now, one of the main concerns and one of the main things that people were bothered during this time was there was some sort of lack of interactivity. The user was not getting some feedback. I can challenge that a bit, so let's just try to put the never-ending slow. And let's figure out what's happening here. So I'm going to add a note, and I'm going to ask you to look up there to the tab. So when I add a spinner, add this list. So as you can see, there is a small spinner happening there. So the browsers give some level of interactivity, some level of spinners. It's not ideal, and that's why we move to the next thing. But, well, there was some feedback, even though it was not that great. So then, that's the exercise. Then we start adding issues. And these were the issues that made the transition to the next scenario. First one is full page refreshes. So like I said, every time the server side renders a page, sends it back to the browser needs to refresh to be able to display the new page to the user. That's why now they're doing this thing called event default. Because in some scenarios, every time we don't tell the browser, hey, don't do your thing, it's going to refresh every time you do a request, especially in the scenarios. Then we also had another issue, which was this lack of dynamic stuff that I was kind of questioning about. There was no cool speakers, no cool progress, there was no cool things that we all like to do and our designers like to add to our pages. So we didn't have any of those things there. Now, then we transition to the next part. Now we're starting adding JavaScript. As you can see, there's a client.js file there in the browser. And this JavaScript is now responsible for doing the same thing we're doing on the server, but now on the client. It pretty much allows to do what's called progressive enhancement. So ideally, the page should all be about JavaScript and should work without JavaScript. But when JavaScript kicks in, it allows you to enhance the user experience, because now you can start adding new things that we didn't have before. In this case, it's pretty much just doing the posting and getting by itself. But, well, there's JavaScript on the page. So there's JavaScript on the page, you can do whatever you want. Now, for server, it's pretty much the same thing, but now we started having some routes. Every time there's a post, we have a route to take care of the post. Every time there's a get, in this case we don't have how configured, but now we need to add something in our HTML. Our HTML needs to know that we need to load this client. So there's the script tag, that's going to tell the browser, hey, we'll load this client JavaScript file every time we load the page on the browser. Now, looking at this client.js, what do we do first? We add event listener, and then we say, okay, the form that we have on our page, get that form, and add another event listener. Every time this form is submitted, what you're going to do is tell the browser, hey, you can do your thing. Event default, I take responsibility for now, and I'm doing the thing that you should be doing, so I'm going to do it myself. So that means we have to take care of the form data object, we need to build the HTTP request, the body of the request, send it to the server, get the data back, and then update the UI by ourselves. So that's the last part that we're going to have there. So we're going to get access to our node list, and for each item that we just got from the backend, we're going to add it to the page and display. And that's what we had in the sprinkles area, in the sprinkles time. Now, I just want to call your attention to something, because this code that we have here, which is add in the page, as you probably remember, it's kind of the same thing that we have on the server. So it's what I mentioned. Now we add the disaggregation of code between the client and the server, and this kind of led to the confusion of every time not knowing where should you put the stuff, what should be happening on each space, on each part, sorry, off speak. And we had a bunch of other issues, because this was the time where we started ignoring the browser. It was the time when we started ignoring the platform. Every time we do an event default, we are telling the browser, don't do a thing, I can do it. And probably I might do it better than you, or that's what we think. Not often it was so, but that's one of the main issues that is area started up. Now, another issue that we started having here is there's a bunch of new code to handle now, because besides having the code we had on the server, now we're going to have the same code on the client. So there's already some duplication that we can see in our pages and in our code. Finally, this kind of contributed to this confusion of the server and the client. So we don't know what stays on the back end and what stays on the front end. And heck, the next transition made it even harder, because now we are in the spot area, the single page applications, and now everything is controlled by JavaScript. JavaScript is responsible for updating stuff, for doing the requests, updating the UI, and the backend only exists to do something. Oh, I'll go there, just real quickly. The client, what we have here. So pretty much what we have here is a React application that's responsible for holding some state, getting the data from the backend, adding some spinners, some loading scenarios so that we can check out, and then do all the kind of things that we're doing in the other scenarios. So here, every time there's a submission from the form, we need to take care of sending the request ourselves, update the stack ourselves, and then finally, once we get the new nodes, update on UI. Now, like I was talking about the server now, first we started having course issues because that's apparently one of the things that started happening in this spotlight. And then we looked at server-side renting anymore. We kind of started to forget what server-side renting was, which, yeah, it's fun. Because now there's this clear separation of front-end and back-end. The back-end is responsible for building the APIs, for building the endpoints. The front-end is only there to call these endpoints. They don't talk to each other. Well, typically understand them more on a red perspective, but teams start to get it separated. There's no more this full stack concept. You know, there might be, but in general, there isn't. So this era, and we also started at an issue, which is if for some reason the browser is not able to run JavaScript, there's no page for you. Because JavaScript controls the experience. Without JavaScript, there's no page. Now imagine that people there have like very small computer, or for some reason JavaScript doesn't hold immediately. Then they ever have to wait so much time for their page. And then we have a bunch of other issues. Pretty much the same thing we had in the sprinkles area. All the server confusion kept going on. We got to the point where people were already doing client-side renting, and even nobody knew about what server-side renting was until recently when Gatsby and Next started talking about the stick server-side renting, server-side generation. Kind of feels like people forgot about them. And then a bunch of other issues. Increased bundle size, because now we have to run a bunch of libraries, the same things we were doing back in the old days. Another thing, runtime performance issues, because if you're shipping 20 megabytes of JavaScript to the browser, and it's a browser on a small computer or device, then that thing is obviously going to take some time. Both. And finally, state management. The biggest discussion in React since or before server components came up and all the environments. State management, there are many ways of doing many opinions. Everyone has their own. Well, it's interesting because kind of didn't need state management back in the days. Now, let's get back to the timeline, because ideally we would have this new transition, this new change. And this new change, for me, would be getting the best of both worlds, of all the worlds of everything that we saw. So basically, the NPM mental model was pretty simple. It was easy to understand, it was not that complex. The developer experience of Spas was really good. All the JSX, all the things that we have nowadays, it makes it so much easier to code and build JavaScript code. What if we could bring these two things and now got back to the thing where JavaScript is there to do progressive enhancement. So JavaScript is there to enhance the user experience. The page ideally loads without any JavaScript and works without JavaScript, but when it loads, then the JavaScript can enhance the experience in the way of the browser. So kind of do the same things that the browser does, but add some extra layers to it. If you don't understand fully what I'm saying, I'll show you when we get to the coding part with Solid. But this would fix all the issues that we saw previously. So the full page refreshes. Once JavaScript kicks in, JavaScript can wake the browser and do the same thing that it's doing now. Lack of dynamic stuff. Once JavaScript kicks in, it can have dynamic stuff, but ideally the page still works without it. And the thing, ignoring the browser. No, I want us to go back to the browser standards. I want us to go back to the platform. I want us to go back to the things that we were using then. And JavaScript doing the progressive enhancement. Another thing, the code to handle the code duplication, the server issues that we were having. Well, what if we could do this thing called code isomorphism, where we have the same code for the server, for the client, and it right in one place supports both places. And you don't need to worry about two different things in different places. How cool would that be? And going finally to the issues of Spas. Increase bundle sizes, let's move code to the server. If we move code to the server, we don't need to worry about having larger bundles going into the pipeline. Another thing, runtime performance issues. If we're doing progressive enhancement, this shouldn't be an issue, because I think one page will still work. And finally, state management. Let the browser do its thing. The browser is very good at doing the state management, and very often we forget these things. Now, this is where we get to the thing that probably all of you can hear about, which is SolidStart. Now, I know it's another JavaScript framework. It seems like every day a new one comes out. It's still in beta, by the way, just a disclaimer. So we came out of until a couple of weeks or months ago. So there's a disclaimer here. But the reason why I'm talking about it and I really like it because it's one of the frameworks, actually a meta framework, which is a framework built on top of another framework. It's one of the frameworks that's embracing this kind of use the platform movement, and also it uses Solid in the back. So there's all the wings that Solid brings to our application. So fine-grained reactivity, no VLOG, which is one of the things that it's not. We can talk about no VLOG here, but I think, Matheus, are you going to talk about VLOG today? No. So just recap. But there's one talk, really we'll talk about VLOG that Ryan Cardiaco did, so the creator of Solid. And you can check it out in YouTube. It was on VidCon last year, if I remember. But it was all about all these things that having a no-VLOG and all the fine-grained reactivity systems that Solid gives to you by default. But I'm getting outside of the track of what I wanted to say. Let's just get back on track and recap what we're talking about. So SolidStart, it's a meta framework powered by SolidJS and Solid Router. It's built on top of these web standards. It's driven by an isomorphic principle and benefits from Solid's fine-grained reactivity. So let's just recap all of these things that we are benefiting from. First, fine-grained reactivity. This is the main selling point of Solid. So you're building reactivity, and for those who do not know what fine-grained reactivity means, is you're building based on the reactivity principle, but you're using these things called signals, effects, and memos. If you're not familiar with this name, if I say observables, for some of you it might be a bit more familiar, but it bases its system on this. So this is kind of what allows you to not use this thing called VLOG, because in Solid, the components only render once. And because of signals and because of the way fine-grained reactivity works, they can keep track of changes to your UI and update the UI by itself. So there's no need for re-rendering, there's no need for VLOG, there's no need for that, all those things. And this is one of the really cool things that Solid benefits from and SolidStart is building on top of. Next thing, isomorphic code. Write code one place, and this code runs on the client and then runs on the server. You don't need to worry about maintaining different places, different things in different places. That's just works. There's multiple rendering modes. So you're going to have things like, you're going to have client-side rendering, you're going to have server-side rendering, you're going to have static site generation, you can do wild ones, you can do a bunch of stuff. If you want to learn a bit more about these patterns, I think Matheus and Alba are going to talk a bit more about some of these patterns today, so check their talks later on today. And another thing is that SolidStart also have CLI templates. You have a bunch of templates you can just use to power your applications. CLI is helping set up this thing really good. And finally, you can deploy pretty much this thing on everywhere. Netlify, Vercel, Cloudflare, pretty much can be deployed on everything. So for something that's still in paper, there's a lot of preparation already. And recently, I should have added a slide here, but recently SolidStart got a huge funding from Google so that the team can start working a bit more on it. So you can start to see these patterns happening, and companies like Google saying, probably this thing is going somewhere, so let's invest a bit here and give the community space to work and see what we can do with it for the web. Just one final selling point on Solid that I'm not going to talk here, because this is not mostly, it's mostly intelligent SolidStart on Solid. It's the great thing about fine-grained reactivity and the things that we're doing nowadays is, if you look into all of the frameworks and all the libraries nowadays, the sites from React and the sites from Next, pretty much all of them are trying to adapt some sort of fine-grained reactivity. So there's probably the command steering here that framework authors will be noticing, because when Solid came up, and Solid was and still will be the most fine-grained reactive thing pretty much everywhere. Then we came up and said, okay, I'm also going to do this thing. Svelte said, okay, no, I want to do that as well. And recently with the release on V5, with this thing called rooms. Rooms in its essence are pretty much signals. So Svelte started using this thing. Angular just grew its signals as well. So all the frameworks are starting to gravitate around this thing that is fine with reactivity. And Solid was pretty much one of the first ones to do it, and still probably the best one to do it nowadays. Now, coming back to SolidStart, because I want to show you some patterns that you can do with it and how you can build an application using SolidStart. The first thing, every time I have to build an application, is load some data. That's one of the needs that we have here. And I'm sorry if you cannot see this real well. I should zoom in here, but I'll explain what's happening up there. So up there, let's just get a clicker here. Up there, we have this function called route data. This is a function that it's called every time you go to the route where this component is defined. This route data can be responsible for fetching data. And inside for route data, I'm using something called create server data. There's also another function called create route data, but this function is pretty much responsible for getting the data that you're going to need in your component down here. While we're doing create server data, we're telling Solid, hey, this thing that we have here, we want to fetch it on the server. So if we put this on the server, what we're doing is we're accessing a database, getting an heroes list, and then we hit valid. Once this thing is hit valid from the route data function, when we go to our component, our component uses this thing called use route data. And this hook is going to return a signal, which is a reference to this heroes thing. So pretty much what's going to happen is this component is going to render once. Heroes are going to get extracted from the use route data, which were fetched on the server. And then use the for component, which is a component from Solid that allows you to build a list and also still keep the reactivity on that thing, because if you start structuring this list, you're going to break the factory reactivity that Solid gives you by default. So there's also some nuances and stuff that you have to do, but what we're doing here is really much. We're rendering this component once, and if and only if somewhere, somehow, we trigger something that will trigger this route data, only then will this call a refetch, the signal will update, and once the signal updates, Solid knows that it needs to run an effect that will only update the specific part of the UI. Now, this is data loading, so if you have data loading, you also need data fetch and data mutation. Mutations are the way where you can go to your database and say, hey, update this thing, create it, delete it, update it, do whatever you want. In this case, what we're doing here, so let's recap. First, we have a form, because forms are the staples of documentation on the web for many, many years. It is a lot. Every time this form, and this form has a method post, when this thing is submitted, something is going to happen. And so what's going to happen is this function called create server action is going to run. How we know it's going to run? Because we are structuring these forms from here, and we are assigning it. Why are we not just using a normal HTML form? This is a progressively immense form. And there's a reason why this thing exists, because there's this underscore. And now when I go to the left coding part, I'll show you what this underscore does. But basically, just to recap, when the form is submitted, this create server action is an action that is going to run the server. And once this function runs, it gets access to the form data. Because that's what happened back in the old days. There was no need for state management. We don't need to track this thing in some sort of state. Once this thing is submitted, the request gets the form data, sends it back. The server action gets the form data, the structure of the form data from the HTTP request, and then you can use it to do whatever you want. So in this case, we are getting a form data from the form data, adding the data to our database, and once it has been successful, we are sending a redirect, which is an HTTP response with a status code 302 without Chrome, which is going to tell the browser, hey, you need to redirect into this route. So as you can see, we are using firstly forms, the staple of documentation on the web, HTTP requests and responses, which are also part of the platform, so we don't need to use any go-to or any routing stuff. We're just using the browser. So the next thing that's really important to note, because we already linked to mutations and data fetching, which are mostly some of the use cases for applications, is how Solid does routing. And this is the Solid router, and it's based on file-based routing. Basically, what we do here is we're telling that the directory structure of the routes, also that's all the applications called routes. It's what describes the structure of the routes on your application. I know this description is a bit tricky to understand. Hopefully it will be easier to understand when we get the coding part. But also you can do something here which allows it to do this thing called nested routing. Nested routing is pretty much when you can couple segments of your URL. And these segments of the URL are coupled to specific parts of your UI. What does this mean? So let's look at this example that we have here. Here we have two routes. In these two routes we have the user, and inside of the user we have the profile, and then we have the user, inside the user we have the account. In both these routes, we can see that there's a username here, and there's also a username here. This part we haven't changed because this part of the UI is coupled to the user route. Now, when nested routing comes into the play is because now, every time you click on profile here, profile is going to be selected. And now we have a new part to our URL, and our profile page is rendered. If we click account, the account part is going to change, and our URL is going to render, and our page is going to render. And this is pretty much the concept of nested routing in essence. Now, I think we have started to go see some code, which hopefully is not too poorly written and has not terrible CSS at all, but let's see if we can figure this out together. So, what we're going to see is an application based on a very poorly built version of status subject model, which is one of the products of OLX. And what we can do here is just add a list of cars. For each car, it has a price, you can delete it, you can see other cars, and you can also add cars. So let's just add this just to see if it's working. Let's check it out. Just takes autocomplete for saving me some time. Okay. If I add a car, it should be loading. There's a very slowly, but there, exactly. So this thing is pretty much the page and where you can see a list of cars. Now, as you can see, let's just go back to the main route. Inside of localhost 3000, we're going inside of the main, and here we see something called the index route. Now, let's look into the code and see how this thing is being built. So, code. For the people in the back, can you read it properly? Okay, cool. First thing that's important to mention, because it's thanks to it that SolidStart exists. Because there's all these configurations and all these multiple rendering patterns that it gives to you by default that allows you to do, as the note tag is, that allows you to configure things. So by default, here I have this application to be a server-side render one. If I wanted, I could use experimental things like islands as well. I can do static-side generation, side rendering. So there's a bunch of stuff here. I'm not going to go in depth in that part. Let's just say all the code that we're seeing now is being rendered on the server. And then we have just the connection here to say, okay, we're going to connect you with our Prisma database. Now, this page, we have something important. So everything starts in the root file. The root file here, it's, as you can see, this is JSX, so Solid is JSX like React as well. So if you're just a React, this thing is pretty much familiar. That's just a nuance that you need to be aware of, which this code will be read once, and by the use of signal, that's the way that you're defining the data. In this page, we have URL, we have a title, all the meta information, so all the things like we're just using writing as standard HTML file. But then we also have something here, which is an error covering, so catch some errors and add the fallback. And then we also have suspense here. For the scenarios that we're doing things like the streaming and stuff, suspense is important. It's important because we need to provide the user with some, we need to provide the user with some fallback scenarios. So just to show you why the user while this thing is still attaching later. Now, we're using the file route system, which is really much telling Solid that, in this case, Solid router, to look into our routes folder and say, okay, for what we have here, we're going to describe our pages. So by default, we have our index, which in this case says hello there. And this index is pretty much the page that's going to show up if I don't have anything here, so it's associated to this part. Now, this thing also has another page, so we have the main route, and inside this main route, you can see some of the stuff. So this main route is a thing that we're going to see when we come to this page. As you can see, main describes the main route. Now, some considerations here. There's this thing, so firstly, we have a error boundary, just in case something fails, we already give a fallback and give feedback to the user that something in call. But basically, we also have something here called an output. Now, an output is there to tell Solid to look for a folder with the name of this file, because we know that this file is named main. So, what the output is going to do, it's going to allow Solid router to do nested routing. What it's going to do is it's going to look for a main folder, because it's the same name as this file, which is this one. And depending on the route that we are inside of this main folder, we're going to render it inside of here. So, just to visualize what we're seeing here, we're inside of the main page. And here you can see that there's this text called, this is the index route. And this text is nowhere to be found here, because we already leveraging nested routing. Because inside of the main, we have an index file. And this index file is there to tell Solid router, when you're doing nested routing, by default, this is the text you're going to show. So here we're showing is in the index route. If we change into the view list, you can see that our URL changed in main/list. And then here, we go into the list route. So nested routing just describes how the route that we're seeing based on the routes that we have inside of our routes folder in this case. inside of the main. So if we have main/list, we know that we're going to be inside of this page. If we have main/create, we know we're going to be inside of this file. So that's this compilation of stuff that we're going to be seeing. Now, this is the file where we're showing this list that we have here. How does this thing work? So we already see, and you might already be thinking about how this works because we just saw it previously. We have our route data function. So this route data function is going to be called before the component first renders. So we need to get the data that we're going to need. And in this case, we're getting this data on the server because we're using the create server data. And we get the data from our Prisma database. So I'm using Prisma LLU, so that's why I'm also running this on the server because Prisma and the client, that's a completely different story. Let's not start talking about that. But so we're fetching this on the server. We get our cars list. If there's no cars, we throw an error, and this error that is going to be handled by Solid and going to be called by the error boundary, and pretty much all of this going to stay there. And then we pick up our cars. These cars are going to be accessed by the use of the use route data book, which is going to be present for cars, which is a signal. And this signal for each of the cars, we're going to display it inside of our car part. Now, other thing that we have here, it's a title component. So this component allows you to overwrite the meta information of your page. So you're writing this thing as normal HTML, and all the stuff as it's just JSX, and it basically is down the SolidStart to go inside of the code that we have here, and override the title that we have for the scenario. So every time you use the title component, in this case there's card list page, that's what we're going to be seeing here. This can be useful for SEO taking that purpose as well. There's also a bunch of other meta information that you can override per component, which is really good if you have to deal with SEO things. And that's pretty much data fetching. So we saw data fetching, now mutation. So you're probably familiar with this part already, but let's recap. We have a component called create card. This component runs a create server action. So this is an action that's going to run on the server every time the submission on the form happens. This form is being sent to this component that we have here. And just so you see I'm not wanting to use this is pretty much an normal form with the method pulse. And once this thing is submitted, so there's a bunch of stuff callouts because I have to build it all CSS and I already told you I'm very bad at it. So once this form is submitted, this action is going to be triggered. Now, we are going to get access to our form data because it comes on a request. You get access to the form data, you get access to our fields, and then we can, firstly, if there's an error, cover the error, or if we want to create a card, and if everything's okay, we just go ahead and create a card in our database. Afterwards, if the card creation fails, we throw an error, the error manager kicks in, takes care of everything, or we just send a redirect, which, like I said, is pretty much just going to return an indirect response with the 302 response so that the browser can handle it and redirect it to the page. Now, I mentioned progressive enhancements and why we're using this form this way, because there's this thing called status, and this comes because we are doing progressive enhancement. By default, if we don't have JavaScript, the browser and the application will just do the normal form thing. But once JavaScript kicks in, we can leverage this thing that's called status. And this status allows you to give some extra feedback to your users. So if there's pending, you can show submitting. If there's an error, you can show an error. So this is one of the benefits of doing progressive enhancement. The page is going to work by default if you have JavaScript on the page, then this thing will kick in and just will extend and allow you to add more feedback layers to your users and customize their experience. Finally, here we see the create. Now there's our bug. Let me just say how much time we're in right now. Okay, we still have time. So just to recap, now there's another part, which is once we go into our card information. Now, as if you look into the route, you can see that it's inside of the main, but there's a number here. So this is the ID instances. So this is the ID that these instances has in the database. Now, we're not going to be creating a route for each one of them because that's crazy, because this one is 86, this one is probably 38, so we're not going to be creating an instance. So we need something to tell solid route that every time something is a number decided by us, there's something that we are not handling. We want to use the value that's here, which in this case is 38, and use it to fetch what is specific page. And this is where this thing called dynamic routes come into the loop. So using a dynamic route, We can create it by using this thing, square brackets, adding a value, a number, and a name to your variable. And what SolidRoute is going to do is, once it renders main, in this case the IP of the database, it's going to grab that value and inject it into this parameter called car ID. And then you can use it to fetch data for that specific scenario. So let's just recap the code that we have here. Here we have raw data, and we get access to these parameters. And from these parameters, what we can do is, okay, I need the car ID, because this is where this value is being injected. We're getting that value, getting it into the car ID. It's being passed as a key. So if you already use 10-stack query, SolidRoute borrowed this pattern from 10-stack query, because then it allows you to do other stuff like data validation and caching validation and a bunch of other stuff. So there's a lot of extra things and stuff that SolidStart is starting to borrow even more from 10-stack query. So I'm super happy to see more patterns and stuff like caching also coming into the loop. But that's not what I was trying to say here. So we get the car ID, we pass it to our function. So the key is going to be injected in the first parameter, and then we use it to get our data. And that's pretty much the way we can, for a specific scenario, get the data, just display that dynamic graph. Now, this page also has something. Allows you to delete the card. So if I click delete the cards, it's going to delete it and it's going to redirect us back. So we can probably figure out, okay, there's a mutation happening here. So how is this thing happening? We also have a form. We have another form. This form is being rendered here, and inside this form is just that button where we can click to delete to the page. Now, as you can see in this form, what we are doing is we're getting access to what ID. And we're going to say afterwards, using this IP, delete the card, and then redirect back to the list. Now, some of you might be thinking, okay, but where do we get this ID? Because it says on the form data, we have ID somewhere there. Well, basically what we're doing is what we did also back in the old times, where we are just adding an hidden input, and this hidden input has an ID, and its ID is the value. So pretty much the user doesn't see this, nobody sees this, it's not visible to the user, but the form, once the form is submitted, gets this value, and then you can use it to display a page, to delete the card. So we are using all the stuff that the browser already gave it, patterns that we are using for a couple of years, so we were using a couple of years ago. So there's a lot of stuff that we're doing here. So I'm pretty sure we're running out of time, so I cannot show you anything more, but I'm just going to show you something that's real quick. Just go here, disable JavaScript, and you should see that the page still works by default, but just that one thing here, just so you see that this thing is still working. I should have this part after, and the log, and it still works. So without JavaScript, this page still works, because it's like I said, progressive enhancement is enabled when JavaScript is there. It does a bunch of other stuff. By default, your page just still works. There's no need to worry about all the extra stuff and all the configurations we need to do back every time. So just to wrap up, because I know that you all want to go have lunch and you're probably thinking, just wrap this up so we can go eat. I have some final thoughts and some things for you to think about and take home probably. So first one is, where's the amazing user experience? So I think I'm trying to challenge something here. The reason why we transitioned from MPAs to spray code and much before SPA was we wanted to build a better experience for our users. We want our users to add, well, the best thing we could from our page. But it kind of feels like somewhere in the process from adopting all the libraries and all the stuff that we're using nowadays, and you cut about it. Really think about it. Another thing that I also like to think, complexity versus quantity. In the days of jQuery, so jQuery is a huge bottom of using the sprinkle space. In the days of jQuery, we were like, our code is too complex. I don't know, the client, the server, I'm tired of this thing. But nowadays, can we really say that? Well, okay, that thing was more complex, but if we look at all the libraries that we have to nowadays to build an SPA, can we really say is it worth it? Some other food for thought that I would like to hear your thoughts about it. And finally, choose whatever resonates with you. You don't need to use SolidStart. Probably some of you that are not even using Solid yet. There's a bunch of other frameworks and meta frameworks going the same line. Like I said, Remix, StealthKit, SolidStart. They're all going on the way of embracing the platform. They're all going on the way that brings us back to the experience and the simpler model that we had back in the old times. So please use the platform, because the platform is secure, is tested, is accessible, and that's all the things that we usually forget by default. I would like to leave you with one quote that I really like, which says, use the platform until you can't, and then augment what's missing. And when you augment, do so with care, because the responsibility of ensuring security, accessibility, and the performance that the platform tries to give you by default now falls entirely up to you. If you want to learn a bit more about some of the stuff that I mentioned today and some of other things, there's still going to be 3 talks today to development about some of the topics that we are talking, and I have quite attention today. So I think after lunch I'm going to be Mateus, then we have Alba afterwards, and then we have Alexa going to talk about Remix, which is also another one of these frameworks that is developing the stakes that I was talking about. So check them out. And one thing that's going to happen tonight, I don't know if you do follow right coming up to the creator of Solid on Twitter. It does live streams pretty much every Friday. And my really good friend Attila is going to be speaking with him today about this thing that is working right now, which is ARIM, which is pretty much an alternative to the Electron, and also you can install it there. Ryan's live streams are usually, and they are so good. There's complete information from Solid and all the JavaScript world. So check them out. If you want, I'm going to give you please a couple of seconds to scan the QR code if you want to check it. If not, you can just go to Ryan's YouTube page and find it because they are going to West End. I think it starts at 9 p.m. today. So if you still have energy after a day of talks, definitely check it out. So, with that said, this was my talk. Thank you so much for having me in Porto. I'll be around if you have any questions.